What if we were all wrong about Britney Spears? What if the story we screamed in the streets, the hashtag we painted on cardboard and timelines, wasn't a rescue, but a ritual? For years, the world watched her crumble on camera. A 13-year conservatorship, knives hidden around the house, marriages collapsing, children pulled away, late-night naked posts, manic dancing alone in a silent mansion. Experts blamed mental illness, family blamed fame, fans blamed the system. Everyone had an answer, except her. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was sent to prove she was fine, to shadow her, to watch her drive in circles at night, to sit in her kitchen while she swallowed the pills that made her forget my face. I was supposed to come back with reassurance. Instead, I came back with questions that keep me awake. What if she isn't just unstable? What if she isn't just traumatized? What if something ancient is riding her life like a stolen body? And every time she calls herself lucky, it's not Britney who's speaking at all. I did not believe in demons before Britney Spears. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I need you to understand exactly who I was when this started, because who I was matters. It matters to the story. It matters to what I am about to tell you. And it matters because if someone like me can be broken by what I witnessed, then the implications of that are something none of us are prepared to sit with. I was a journalist, 15 years in the field. I had covered war zones where the ground was still warm from the dead. I had sat across from convicted killers and watched them smile. I had filed stories from hospital corridors, courtroom floors, and the smoking wreckage of lives that had come apart in real time. I was not a man who flinched. I was not a man who felt things in rooms. I dealt in facts, in sources, in the verifiable and the documented. The invisible was not my department. I am telling you this because what follows will sound like the account of someone who was already coming undone. Someone who wanted to see something and so manufactured it from shadows and coincidence. I understand why you might think that. I would have thought the same thing 15 years ago, not anymore. The assignment came through a contact at a mid-level entertainment outlet, the kind of publication that existed in the narrow corridor between journalism and gossip, credible enough to be taken seriously, flexible enough to print what the larger outlets quietly declined. My editor framed it as an investigative wellness piece, a 30-day surveillance and access project. The subject was Britney Spears. The angle was simple. The conservatorship had ended. The world had erupted in celebration. 13 years of legal control over her finances, her medical decisions, her movements, her entire life, dismantled by a court order and cheered by millions who had fought for exactly that moment. The Free Britney movement had become a cultural force, signs in the streets, documentaries, hashtags that trended for weeks. A collective, righteous, absolute certainty that a woman had been wrongfully caged and now deserved to soar. My job was to spend 30 days in her orbit and confirm what everyone already believed. She was fine. She had always been fine. The system had failed her. And now that she was free, she was thriving. That was the story my editor wanted. That was the story I fully expected to write. I had no reason to believe otherwise. I had read the coverage, I had watched the clips, I had seen her Instagram posts, the dancing, the captions, the declarations of joy and freedom and gratitude. She seemed, if anything, like a woman exhaling for the first time in over a decade. I took the assignment without hesitation. I was wrong about almost everything. The first night I watched her, it was just past midnight. I was parked on the street adjacent to her property, camera equipment on the passenger seat, coffee going cold in the cup holder. The neighborhood was the kind of quiet that only money can manufacture, the deliberate silence of gates and hedges and security systems designed to keep the world at a careful, compensated distance. I had a sight line to the back of the property through a gap in the tree line, narrow but workable. The pool lights were off. I noted that in my log. No exterior lights. The house itself was dark except for a faint blue glow from somewhere deep inside. A television maybe, or a phone screen casting its pale light against the ceiling. Nothing alarming. nothing that suggested anything other than a woman who could not sleep. Then she came outside. She was wearing white, a loose dress that caught what little moonlight reached the yard and made her look almost luminescent against the dark water of the pool. She walked to the edge slowly, without urgency, and stood there for a long moment, completely still, looking down at the surface the way you look at something that is looking back at you. Then she began to dance. I have seen Britney Spears perform. I have watched the archival footage, the early videos, the stadium tours, the Vegas residency clips where she moved like electricity poured into a human shape. What I watched through my lens that night was nothing like any of that. This was not performance. This was not choreography. This was something older and more private. Her body moving in slow, deliberate rotations, arms lifting and falling in a rhythm that felt less chosen than received. Like she was not deciding to move, but being moved, like something was practicing. I told myself I was watching a woman process grief through the only language she had ever truly spoken. I told myself it was beautiful in a sad way. I almost believed it. Then she stopped, dead still, mid-movement, like a film reel cut without warning, and she turned and looked directly at my lens, not in my direction, not toward the tree line where I was parked in the dark behind 200 feet of landscaping, at the lens, at the specific, precise point of glass I was shooting through. The camera was not visible from where she stood. There was no reflection, no flash, no sound. There was no logical mechanism by which she could have known exactly where to look. She looked anyway. I lowered the camera, sat very still, told myself it was coincidence, told myself the human eye is drawn to darkness, and she had simply looked toward the darkest point in her sightline. I told myself this with the calm, practiced certainty of a man who has spent 15 years making facts behave. Then I checked my equipment log. The timestamp on the first photograph I had taken that night read 3:17 a.m. I looked at my phone. It was 12:43 a.m. I sat with that for a long time. I did not have an explanation. I filed it under equipment malfunction and drove home. I did not sleep. The feeling that had settled into my chest when she looked at the lens, something dense and pressurized, like the air before a storm breaks, did not leave when I left the property. It did not leave when I got home. It did not leave at all. I came back the following night, and the night after that. I told myself it was professionalism, diligence, thoroughness. I told myself I was building a complete picture, gathering enough material to write something definitive and fair. Before I got out of the car, on the third night, I opened my camera and scrolled back through every photograph from the first evening. Every single image, regardless of what time I had actually taken it, was time-stamped 3:17 a.m. All of them. I sat in the dark outside her house, and I looked at those timestamps for a long time. Then I picked up my camera, got out of the car, and went back to work. Because that is what I told myself I was doing. Working. By the end of the first week, I had developed a rhythm. I arrived before midnight. I parked in the same spot on the street adjacent to her property. I drank bad coffee, and I watched, and I logged what I saw with the same clinical detachment I had applied to every assignment in 15 years of doing this work. I was building a file. I was gathering material. I was doing my job. That is what I told myself. What I was actually doing was waiting. I understood that on some level even then, that the surveillance had shifted from professional to something I did not have a clean word for. I was not just watching Britney Spears anymore. I was watching for something I could not name and had not seen clearly and could not yet bring myself to write in my log because writing it would make it a fact, and I was not ready for it to be a fact. The dancing had continued every night, always after midnight, always in white, always with that same quality of movement that felt less like expression and more like instruction. Her body receiving something the rest of the world could not hear. I had filled 2 memory cards with footage. I had reviewed all of it. And every time I watched it back, The same thing happened in my chest. That dense, pressurized feeling. That sense of air before a storm. I had stopped filing it under equipment malfunction. I had not yet decided what to file it under. On the 9th night, she got in her car. It was just after 1 a.m. No warning, no visible preparation. The lights in the house were off, and then suddenly she was in the driveway, moving toward her car with the kind of purposeful calm that suggested she knew exactly where she was going. I started my engine and followed at a distance, keeping 2 blocks between us, headlights low. She drove without apparent destination. Through the quiet residential streets surrounding her neighborhood, past the closed storefronts and the empty intersections and the occasional gas station burning white light into the dark. She did not speed. She did not run lights. She drove the way someone drives when they are not going somewhere, but moving away from something, or towards something that does not exist on any map. I had read about the drives in my research. Sources close to her had described them as a coping mechanism, aimless roaming, a way of managing the pressure that built inside her when the walls of the house got too close. I had noted it in my file as behavioral, consistent with the documented anxiety and the isolation and the sleeplessness, explainable, human. I was still trying to explain things then. After 40 minutes, she turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that cut between 2 empty lots on the edge of the neighborhood. No streetlights, no other cars. The kind of road that does not appear on navigation apps because it does not officially go anywhere. She pulled forward about 30 yards and stopped. I cut my headlights and pulled into the brush at the entrance of the path. Killed my engine. Sat in the sudden total dark and watched her car sitting motionless ahead of me. Nothing happened for a long time. Her car was completely still. No interior light. No movement visible through the rear window. No phone screen glow. Just a dark shape sitting on a dark road, in the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind you feel pressing against the windows of the car like something leaning in from outside. I raised my camera, trained it on her rear window, waited. Then the sounds began. I want to be precise about this because I have replayed it in my memory more times than I can count, and I need to describe it accurately. It was not music. It was not speech. It was something that existed in the register between the two, rhythmic and deliberate, with the cadence of language but none of the recognizable shape of words. Low, patient, like something counting in a system that did not use numbers. I checked my recording equipment. It was running. The levels were moving. Whatever I was hearing, it was real enough to register on the meter. Then my radio turned on. I had not touched it. The key was not in the ignition. The car was completely off. But the radio came on with a soft, clean click, the kind a system makes when it is functioning exactly as intended. And what came through the speakers was Lucky, not a modern version, not a clean digital stream. This was Lucky the way a voice sounds when it is traveling from very far away, slowed, stretched, the frequencies pulling apart from each other like taffy, like the song was being transmitted from somewhere underwater, from somewhere that had been underwater for a very long time. I reached to turn it off. My hand was wet. I looked down. My nose was bleeding. Not a trickle. A steady, deliberate flow running over my lip and onto my fingers and dripping onto the center console with a patience that felt almost ceremonial. There was no pain, no pressure, no warning of any kind. Just blood, arriving quietly, like it had been scheduled. I pressed the back of my hand against my nose and looked up. Her silhouette in the car had changed. I do not know how else to say it. The shape of her behind the rear window was no longer moving the way a human body moves. It was too fluid, too slow, the kind of movement you see when something is learning a shape from the inside, testing the range of it, finding the edges, understanding what it can and cannot do within the limits of the form it currently occupies. Her head tilted at an angle that was slightly beyond what a neck should comfortably allow. Her shoulders rose and fell in a rhythm that did not match breathing. I raised my camera with my free hand and shot through the windshield. Through the lens, I saw the passenger seat. There was a shadow in it, not cast by anything, not the product of light and angle and the geometry of the car's interior, a shadow that was present independently, occupying the seat the way a person occupies a seat, with mass and intention and the specific quality of stillness that belongs to something that is choosing not to move rather than simply being still. I kept shooting. Then my hand slipped on the steering wheel and my headlights flicked on accidentally. A single involuntary flash of light that lasted less than a second. The passenger seat was empty. Her silhouette in the rear window was still normal. The shape of a woman sitting quietly in a parked car at 1 a.m. on a dirt road, which is strange enough on its own but contains nothing that cannot be explained. The radio was off. I did not turn it off. It was simply off. I sat in the brush for a long time after that. I'm not sure exactly how long. Long enough for my nose to stop bleeding. Long enough for the dense pressure in my chest to recede from acute to chronic, from something happening to something that was simply always there now, a new and permanent feature of my interior landscape. When I finally looked at my camera, I scrolled through the photographs I had taken of her car. Every single one was time-stamped 3:17 a.m. My phone said it was 2:09 a.m. I wrote one line in my notes that night. Just one. I stared at it for a long time before I closed the notebook. Not mental illness. Something else. Cannot explain yet. My editor called the following morning. She wanted the story. Wanted to know where I was with it, whether I had enough for a first draft, whether the angle was holding up under 30 days of actual observation. I told her I needed more time. She asked why. I looked at my hand. At the dried blood still caught in the lines of my knuckles that I had not yet washed off. I am not sure why I had not washed it off. I think some part of me needed it to stay there a little longer. Proof. Evidence. The kind of thing I could look at and know was real. Because I don't think she's alone in there, I said. I hung up before she could respond. I needed to get inside the house. She invited me in on a Tuesday. I still do not fully understand how it happened. I had been working a peripheral approach for several days, making myself visible in the spaces she occasionally occupied. A coffee shop 2 blocks from her house, a stretch of road she drove past on her afternoon circuits. Not approaching, not engaging, simply existing in her radius with the patient. Calibrated presence of someone who understood that proximity is its own form of introduction. On Tuesday afternoon, she pulled into the coffee shop parking lot and walked past me on her way to the door and stopped. Looked at me the way you look at someone you recognize, but cannot immediately place. I gave her nothing. Kept my expression neutral, unremarkable. The face of a man with nowhere particular to be. She said, "You've been outside my house." Not a question, not an accusation. A statement delivered with the same flat certainty you use when you are reading something aloud. I told her I was a journalist. I told her I was working on a piece about life after the conservatorship. I told her I thought her story deserved to be told on her own terms, by someone willing to listen without an agenda. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not suspicion, not warmth. Something that was evaluating me on a frequency I could not identify. Then she said, "Come by tomorrow, I'll make tea." The knives were the first thing I noticed. Not because they were hidden or arranged with any obvious intent. That was almost what made them worse. They were simply present. A large kitchen knife on the counter beside the coffee maker. 2 more on the island, blades facing outward. 1 on the windowsill above the sink, catching the afternoon light. 1 on the small table beside the couch in the living room, sitting next to a paperback novel like a bookmark. Casual, domestic. The way you leave things in the places where you last used them. Except that the places made no sense, and the frequency made no sense, and the cumulative effect of moving through a home where knives appeared in every room like a recurring motif in a language you almost understood was something that settled into the base of my spine and stayed there. I did not mention them. I wrote them in my log that night from memory, room by room, placement by placement. 7 total that I counted. There may have been more. We were sitting in the kitchen when her phone lit up. She glanced at it, and something in her face changed. Not dramatically. Not the way faces change in films when the moment arrives. Subtly. A slight tightening around the eyes. A stillness that replaced the easy, almost performative warmth she had been projecting since I arrived. Kevin Federline had posted videos of her with the boys, shot without her knowledge, years earlier. Private moments made suddenly, irrevocably public. The comments were already flooding in. I watched her read them. Her hands were completely still. She set the phone face down on the counter and picked it back up almost immediately, opened the camera, and began to record. What came out of her was not grief. It was not the ragged, reactive anger of a woman ambushed by betrayal. It was something else entirely. Stern, measured, each word placed with the deliberate weight of something that had been waiting a long time for permission to speak. The cadence was wrong for the emotion the situation called for. Too controlled, too certain. Like the words had been prepared somewhere deep and were only now being allowed to surface. The phone did not shake. Her body was trembling. I could see it in her shoulders, in the slight movement of the fabric of her shirt. But the phone was perfectly, unnaturally still. I looked at the microwave clock behind her. 3:17. It was 2:40 in the afternoon. When she finished recording, she lowered the phone and turned to look at me, and she said something. I am not going to write exactly what she said, because some part of me is still not ready to commit it fully to the page. What I will tell you is that it was specific. It was about me. It was about something from my past that I have never told anyone. Not an editor, not a colleague, not a person I have ever been close to. Something I had not thought about in years and had believed, with the comfortable certainty of the deeply buried, was known only to me. She said it the way you mentioned the weather. Then she smiled and asked if I wanted more tea. I looked down at my hand. My nose was bleeding. I excused myself to find the bathroom. The hallway was dim, lit by a single fixture that cast more shadow than light. I tried the second door on the left. It was not the bathroom. It was a small room, a sitting room, or what had once been one. Sparse, a chair against the wall, a small round table in the center, and at that table, in the chair opposite the door, sat Britney. She was having tea. She was not in the kitchen anymore. I do not know how she had moved through the house ahead of me without passing me in the hallway. I do not have an explanation for that, and I have stopped trying to construct one. What I am telling you about is what was across the table from her. A hand, resting on the table with the relaxed, unhurried stillness of something that had been there for a long time and intended to remain. Human in its proportions, the right size, the right number of fingers, the right general architecture of knuckle and nail, but the skin was the color of something that had never been warm, and the angle was wrong in a way I cannot fully articulate. Not broken, not deformed, simply positioned in a way that suggested the joint structure beneath it did not operate on the same principles as mine. The fingers were curled slightly inward, relaxed, like someone listening. The moment the light from the hallway reached the table, the hand pulled back. Not quickly, not with alarm or urgency, slowly, deliberately, the way you withdraw from a table when a meal is finished, with the patience of something that has never once needed to hurry. Britney looked up at me. Wrong room, honey. Her voice was warm, easy. The voice of a woman who had not just been sitting in a dim room having tea with something that should not exist. I looked at the chair across from her, empty. I looked at the second teacup on the table, full, steaming, as though it had just been poured. I looked at the clock on the wall, 3:17. I went back to the kitchen. I do not remember deciding to. I was simply there, sitting across from her again, and she was talking about her sons and her music and the book she was writing, and she was warm and funny and present in the way that she sometimes was. The way that made you understand completely why the world had fallen in love with her in the first place. She took her medication at some point, measured, routine, the practiced motion of someone who had been doing this for years. 2 pills with a glass of water. She set the glass down and continued talking. Within minutes, something behind her eyes went quiet. It was not gradual. It was a light being switched off at the end of a long hallway, present and then not present, with nothing in between. She looked at me, and the recognition in her face was simply gone. Not confused, not searching, gone. Like a word erased from a page so completely that you cannot tell it was ever there. I said her name. Nothing. I leaned forward. I told her who I was. I referenced the coffee shop, the conversation, the tea she had made. I watched her face for any flicker of return. Nothing. I said her sons' names, Sean, Jaden. I said them slowly, clearly, the way you say something to someone who is very far away and you are not sure the sound is reaching them. Something moved. Deep behind her eyes, something shifted, the way light shifts underwater when something passes through it far below the surface. Her lips parted. Sean, she said. Barely a whisper. The voice of someone speaking from the bottom of something very deep. Then it was gone. Her face smoothed back into that perfect, pleasant blankness. She looked at me with a polite, empty smile. The smile of someone who has just met you and is trying to make you feel welcome. I reached across the table and took her hand. From somewhere in the house, no phone, no speaker, no visible source of any kind, Lucky began to play. Full volume, crystal clear, not distorted, not slowed, perfect. Every note pristine and exact. The way a song sounds when it is being played as a statement rather than a soundtrack, like a reward. She smiled at me, wide and warm and completely, utterly wrong. I picked up her phone from the counter, opened the video she had recorded, pressed play. There she was, stern, controlled, each word a stone. And there in the frame, standing directly behind her in the space between the counter and the wall, was a shape, a figure, present in the recording with the casual, unremarkable quality of something that belonged there, something that had always been there. It was not looking at her. It was looking at the camera. It was looking at me. I left the house without saying goodbye. I stood in the driveway, and the air outside felt different from the air inside. Thinner somehow, like the house had been operating at a different atmospheric pressure and my body was only now recalibrating. Every light in the house went off, simultaneously, not one by one, all of them, at once, as though a single switch controlled everything. I looked up at her bedroom window. She was standing there, still, watching me with that wide, warm, perfect smile. I got in my car. I looked at the dashboard clock, 3:17. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the feeling in my chest, the one that had arrived the first night and never left, beating now like a second heart, steady, patient, like something settling in. I kept going. In the photographs from the drive, the ones taken through my windshield of her car sitting on the dirt road, there was a shape visible in the space beside her car. Not in the passenger seat this time. Outside the car. Standing in the dark beside the driver's door with the patient, proprietary stillness of something standing guard. I kept going. By the time I reached the photographs from inside the house, I had found it in 17 separate images. 17 in backgrounds, in the reflections of windows and mirrors and the dark screen of a television that was not turned on, in the spaces behind her that the eye dismisses as shadow and moves past without examination. Always the same shape, always the same quality of stillness, always positioned in relation to her, with the specific, consistent proximity of something that was not following her, something that was accompanying her. I sat back in my chair, And I understood something that rearranged every assumption I had carried into this assignment. The entity had never been hiding from me, not once. Not from the first night at the pool to the last moment in her driveway. It had been present in every photograph, every recording, every room I had entered. It had been there when she danced, and when she drove, and when she took her medication, and when she looked at me across the table with a smile that was not hers. It had not been hiding. It had been watching me back. Every nosebleed, every timestamp, every distorted note of Lucky bleeding through a radio that had no power source. None of it had been warning. None of it had been threat. It had been introduction. It had been, in whatever language such things communicate in, a greeting. And I had spent 30 days greeting it back. I opened a new document and I began to write. The article came differently than any piece I had written in 15 years. Not with the usual resistance. The searching for the right entry point. The negotiation between what I knew and what I could prove. The careful architecture of a narrative built to withstand scrutiny. It came fast, faster than I was thinking. The sentences arrived fully formed, as though they had been composed somewhere else and were only now being transferred through my hands onto the page. I did not question it. I told myself I was in flow. I told myself this was what it felt like when 30 days of material finally found its shape. I wrote about the conservatorship, about the 13 years of legal control that the world had decided was imprisonment, about the movement that had grown up around her freedom, the signs and the hashtags and the absolute moral certainty of millions of people who had never been inside her house, never sat across from her at a kitchen table, never watched her face go blank in the space between one breath and the next. I wrote about what I had seen, not all of it, not the hand or the T or the shape in 17 photographs. I wrote around those things the way you write around something you cannot yet name, circling it, approaching it from different angles, letting the reader feel the shape of it without ever making it fully visible. And then I wrote the conclusion. I wrote that the conservatorship had not been a cage. I wrote that the people who had built it, whatever their motives, whatever their failures, whatever legitimate grievances existed within that complicated and painful history, had understood something that the rest of us had not. That the structure they had built around her life, as flawed and as compromised as it was, had been functioning as something more than legal control. It had been functioning as a container, and we had celebrated when we broke it open. I wrote, we did not ask what we were freeing her from. We only asked what we were freeing her from the people who held the keys. We never considered that the keys existed for a reason, that some doors are locked from the outside because of what is on the inside, that the thing we were so certain needed liberating was not the woman. We marched for her freedom and we got it. And whatever was inside that house on the night I first watched her dance alone in the dark, whatever has been with her since before any of us started paying attention, it got exactly what it needed to. I stopped typing, read it back, then I kept going. The last paragraph came the way the rest had, fast, certain, already written somewhere I could not access consciously. My fingers moved and the words appeared, and I watched them arrive on the screen with the detached, slightly dissociated calm of someone observing a process they are not entirely in control of. I typed the last line. She's fine. She's always been fine. She's the lucky one. I lifted my hands from the keyboard, stared at the screen. I did not remember writing it. I read it again and again. I scrolled back through the final paragraph, looking for the point at which my voice had ended and something else had begun, and I could not find it. The transition was seamless, invisible. The join was perfect. I looked up at my reflection in the dark monitor. My reflection smiled, not after I smiled, not in response to any change in my expression. Before, a half second before my face did anything at all, the reflection smiled, wide and warm and completely, utterly wrong. I pushed back from the desk, stood up, walked to the window, pressed my forehead against the cold glass and looked out at the street below and breathed until the breathing felt like mine again. When I turned back to the desk, the document was still open. The last paragraph was still there. But below the last line, below "she's the lucky one," there was a new line, one I had not typed, one that had not been there when I stood up. It was addressed to you, not to my editor, not to a reader in the abstract. To you, specifically, directly, with the intimate certainty of something that knows exactly who is listening. It said, "You wanted her free. You marched, you chanted, you held your signs, and you screamed her name, and you believed with everything you had that you were saving her. So did I. But I need you to understand something now, something I cannot prove, but cannot unknow. We did not free Britney Spears. We freed what was inside her. And it has been waiting a very long time for exactly that. It did not need a stage. It did not need a residency or a comeback or a recording contract. It needed what you gave it. It needed the door open. You gave it exactly what it needed. So did I. We are all, every one of us, the lucky ones." I stood in the middle of my apartment and I read those words, and the second heartbeat in my chest, the one that had arrived the first night and never left, beat once, slow, deliberate, like something confirming receipt. The screen went dark. From my speakers, unprompted, unplayed, connected to nothing, drawing power from nowhere, Lucky began to play. I did not turn it off. I sat back down at my desk and I listened to it all the way through. And when it ended, I did the only thing I had left to do. I hit publish. If this story chilled you to the bone, you haven't seen the full picture yet. Make sure to join our exclusive membership right now. I am about to release the restricted files on the Britney Spears arrest, including a terrifying first-hand account from the arresting officer who saw what was really in that car. You won't find this anywhere else. Click the join button and don't be left in the dark.